I am Nora Collins. I am FAN's Director of Campaigns and Creation Care. So it is my privilege to welcome you all tonight and to thank you for joining us. Um, before I hand it over to Bob for opening prayer, I just want to go over a few housekeeping tips, please. And we're going to get underway very quickly, but just a couple of housekeeping tips. Indeed, you are invited to place your name and your city or town into the chat, which is highlighted there. But in just a moment, we're going to shut that chat down and ask you rather to submit your questions for our amazing panelists tonight with that button there, the Q&A button. The other button that you might care about is the closed captions button. So you're going to click that if that's, of course, one of your needs. So again, we'll shut the chat down in just a minute and instead ask you to put your questions as they occur to you at any point into the Q&A. Well, it is my privilege to welcome Bob Gedderts to open us in prayer. And Bob, I'm just going to brag about you for a minute.
Okay.
Bob is very beloved by FAN. He is a member of the Ohio Franciscan Justice Circle. And most excitingly, to share the good news that in just 2 weeks, his brand new book can be ordered after 45-year career in recycling and plastics and zero waste. I'm so glad you brought it. The book title is Untangling Plastics, the Missing Link in Mitigating Climate Change. So Bob, thank you for being here tonight and thanks for your many years of service.
Well, thank you, Nora, and thank you for the invitation. And I look forward to this webinar. And given the topic that we have to discuss tonight, I chose a prayer from Pope Francis that's listed in his Laudato Si document, the encyclical. It's a prayer for our earth. And I'd like for us to take a moment and reflect on our message tonight and for the protection of the earth and the protection of the poor. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and the forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Amen.
Amen. And thank you, Bob, for opening our time together with a beautiful prayer. I'm Sister Louise Lears, and it's my privilege to work with the Franciscan Action Network on issues of environmental justice. And we are delighted that you're joining us for this first of 3 webinars on the right to a clean and healthy environment. And we welcome our friends at Franciscans International as co-sponsors of this webinar. You'll receive a recording of the webinar soon after its completion, along with a list of resources so that you don't have to take notes or screenshots during the webinar. The first webinar in our series focuses on the global right to a clean and healthy environment, as defined by the United Nations, upheld by the International Court of Justice, and uplifted by Franciscan communities across the globe. The second webinar on December 2nd features the Green Amendments movement in the United States, which seeks to enshrine that same right to a clean and healthy environment in every state constitution. Our third webinar in January 2026, date to be decided, focuses on practical strategies for Franciscans and others to advance green amendments in states where there's already some movement. Let me give us an idea of how we'll proceed for the next hour. First, we'll hear from Brother Jim Donegan, OFM CAP. Brother Jim is the liaison officer for Franciscans International, and he's going to explore with us the profound need for deep change in the face of the climate crisis and how Franciscans are called to act with urgency. Then we'll hear from Maria Farah, our Franciscans International representative at the United Nations. Maria will share how Franciscans International is preparing for COP30, the UN Climate Change Conference in Brazil, which starts on November 10th. Then my colleague Nora will moderate a conversation with Brother Jim and Maria based on the questions that you have entered in the Q&A, and enter those questions at any time, and remember, in the Q&A, not in the chat. And to entice you to register for the December 2nd webinar, we're going to introduce Maya K. Van Rossum, who is the founder of the Green Amendments for the Generations movement in the United States. And we'll close our time together, as we always do, with prayer and opportunities for advocacy. So, Brother Jim, we are ready to hear from you about the profound need for deep change and the need for an urgency for Franciscans.
Thank you, Sister Louise. So for these next 10 minutes, I'm going to be talking about deep change in this situation of the ecological crisis, deep change in ecological conversion. And in particular, what I'll be looking at here is this concept of turning over a new leaf. This is the name for the UN University's 2025 Interconnected Disaster Risks Report. It's coming from the United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security. And it's really looking at the global crises, the climate crisis, the crisis of inequality, of pollution, and how they really require really more of a sense of conversion, of transformation, and not simply patches, not just solutions that have to do with taking care of the things that we see on the surface right away. And so the report talks about a need to shift away from simply diagnosing problems to finding solutions, and solutions on a more profound level than we've often worked in the past. And it identifies 5 deep changes to call for shifts in mindset and structure, which we'll be going through in a little bit of depth in these next 10 minutes. And how also Franciscan spirituality is connected to this, how it offers an inner foundation for that transformation. And that for us as Franciscans and Franciscan-hearted people, there's an invitation or perhaps even a mandate to be agents of such deep change. So what are these 5 deep changes? First, to rethink waste from trash to treasure, to realign with nature from separation to harmony, to reconsider responsibility from me to we, to reimagine the future from seconds to centuries, and to redefine value from economic wealth to planetary health. So we'll look at each one of these here in this particular process. I just say that these are not just modern scientific goals, but also a reorientation of how we can be open to grace, to be grateful for that grace, and into a sense of reverence. So the first one, rethinking waste from trash to treasure. And the report challenges our throwaway culture, really. We actually produce more than 2 billion tons of household waste per year around the world, most of which is burned or buried. And yet, um, in God's creation, nothing truly is waste. In Franciscan spirituality, all creation is precious, having come into being by way of a loving creator. And so, what we call waste as something more to it, that nothing is simply to be discarded, considered as useless or rubbish, as is often the way that the world operates on a daily basis. And because even though that which we call waste came into being from a loving creator, then even that so-called waste is part of the relationship with God and is part of the praise of God, even according to its particular properties. And so the concept of waste is only an illusion, one in which we decide what's worth having, what isn't worth having, what we consider useful, what we consider useless. So the challenge then is to move from consumerism to reverence, a challenge to look upon all that we've considered as waste also as really creature made by our creator, and the need for us to have some reverence for it. That's where ideas of circular economies come into play for durability, repair, reuse. An example the report gives is of the town of Kamikatsu, Japan, which has done a particularly important set of works in trying to do more recycling and having less be discarded at the end to have that circular economy. So from trash to treasure, that even the waste is treasure. And then the second one is to realign with nature from separation to harmony. In his Canticle of the Creatures, St. Francis doesn't speak of creation as something external to be utilized or exploited, but rather something which he saw in which he saw himself in relationship. Brother sun, sister moon, brother wind, sister water, brother fire, sister mother earth. Thus, the call is to a sense of harmony with nature based on a sense of kinship with creation, in a relationship with the same loving creator. Humanity is part of nature, not apart from it. And so it calls us to a sense of stewardship instead of attempts to dominate or to exploit. And example from this that's given in the report is some work that was done in the Kissimmee River in Florida to straighten it out, to be able to make use of it from an industrial perspective, but that had an effect of a negative nature on the ecosystem of the area. And so that there's been work to restore that as in terms of the way that things have been in place naturally from before. Important of this, I would say, from a Franciscan perspective, is a sense of contemplation for us to have, as it means to dispel the illusion of separation, to feel that, to be able to truly understand and contemplate that sense of being in relationship with nature. And then to reconsider responsibility from the me to the we. Thinking of when St. Francis stripped off his clothes before the Bishop of Assisi, he renounced not only wealth, but the system that divided humanity into rich and poor, powerful and powerless. And so he called himself brother to all, extending that understanding even to lepers for whom he had previously always felt a sense of disgust. So all of this goes into St. Francis's vision of fraternity, of being brother himself with all of the sisters and brothers in creation. And so the sense of relationship with all, we come to a greater sense of co-responsibility with those on the margins, co-responsibility also with creation itself, a shared sense of belonging rather than just promoting oneself. An example the report gives is of a problem, actually, that it identifies of carbon colonialism, a practice where rich countries attempt to offset their carbon footprint by planting trees in other parts of the world, offsetting the responsibility to other parts of the world, when that's a shared responsibility that all of us have in terms of the care of creation, in terms of responding to the climate crisis. And then reimagining the future from seconds to centuries. St. Francis' view of his place in creation was not to take advantage simply of what he could now, but rather to live in the present according to God's plan, a plan that spans throughout all of time and eternity. So Francis lived in the now, but saw eternally. This is different from what I call in here presentism, which is perhaps a little closer to what St. Paul refers to in 1 Corinthians when he warns us of the people who say, "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die," living only in the present. We have a responsibility, really, to care for the future generations and to avoid shifting responsibility for those who are to come in the future. And this moves us to more of a sense of hope as being about fidelity, about taking care, being faithful to taking care of creation, and not simply an optimism that eventually we'll figure out how to fix things. The report itself gives an example of nuclear waste, that we've had nuclear waste stored up in places to protect ourselves from the damage that it could cause in the future, and yet we don't have solutions just yet of what to do with it. And so that's hoping for the future in terms of optimism as opposed to fidelity. This is calling us to a sense of fidelity. And finally, redefining value from economic wealth to planetary health. The modern world tends to measure progress by GDP, by consumption and extraction. But this is silly indeed. If 100 people go to the hospital because of a heart attack, GDP goes up. So this doesn't make any sense from a perspective of, purely at least from a perspective of progress. As Pope Francis had said in Laudato Si, the market alone cannot guarantee integral human development and social inclusion. So we need to redefine value as planetary health as a means to discover something that's very important from a Franciscan perspective, that what we truly are able to treasure is not something we can own, but only something that we can share. The sense that St. Francis had of a life sine proprio, which means having nothing of our own, because everything that is of grace is something that only we can share in reality, not something we can actually grasp onto. And as GDP rises, there continues to be an imbalance of who benefits, an emphasis on economic value, and such that we even have deforested land valued 7.5 times more than that of forested land. So a shift of change in those priorities. Conversion and deep change, we can only make changes really if we really get down into the roots and not just at the superficial level. Conversion of vision and mindset in setting the pace for new policies is very important, not just modifying policies based on the old mindsets, a true conversion of heart, one in which we're able to work with both what the report refers to as the inner levers and the outer levers. The inner levers meaning changes in paradigm regarding our assumptions of our systems, and the outer levers then being changes to policy and institutions and education and so forth. And finally, just looping back to turning over a new leaf. One of the lead authors, Dr. Zita Sebesvari, she says, this report is not just about avoiding disaster, it's about breaking free from the mindset of merely mitigating harm. We limit ourselves when we focus only on preventing the worst rather than striving for the best. And for St. Francis, conversion is not just about innovation, about coming up with something new. It's about communion, it's about relationship. And this image of turning over a new leaf, it truly has both ecological and spiritual implications, the spiritual ones that should motivate us as we go forward. It's important to remember this even has implications in other areas, such as migration, as oftentimes the destruction of the environment is a push factor for people to have to go to other places. And so turning over a new leaf in our hearts and in our actions, not waste, but rather awe and wonder of the grace of all creation, not isolation, but kinship and relationship, and not domination, appropriation, but a shared joy of creation. And with that, I'll next turn it over to Maria for the next part of these presentations.
Thanks so much, Jim. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Can everybody see it? Without any...
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. So thank you so much for joining this evening. I'm going to speak on the right to a healthy environment, including the process towards recognition and the elements of the right, as well as some new developments and the issue of corporate capture at the UN. I'm also going to, maybe towards the end, as Sister Louise mentioned, discuss some of FI's plans for the COP. And just generally, as mentioned briefly by Jim, in terms of why FI is theologically interested in the right to healthy environment, it's also been a big focus of our work for the past number of years, from recognition to implementation, because of the issues that our partners throughout the world continue to convey to us, and the real impacts that they see in terms of environmental degradation, which is often brought about by business activities and operations. So just as a very quick background, the first mention of the right to a healthy environment at the international level was in 1972 Stockholm Declaration, which mentions the importance of the environment for the right to life, dignity, and well-being. In 1992, the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro noted that human beings are entitled to a healthy and productive life in harmony with nature. At the regional level, the African human rights system was the first to recognize the human right to a healthy environment in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. This was followed by mention in other international and regional agreements, including the San Salvador Protocol and the Arab Charter on Human Rights. At the national level, Portugal was the first country to recognize a right to a healthy environment in its constitution in 1976. This was followed by Spain in 1978 and Peru in 1979. Okay, so around 2020, there started to be an increase of discussions in regard to recognizing the right to a healthy environment. And as part of this, on 9 September 2020, a core group of states focusing on human rights and the environment delivered a statement at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva that they intended to put forward a resolution on the right to a healthy environment. The core group consisted of Costa Rica, the Maldives, Morocco, Slovenia, and Switzerland. The following day after this joint statement, civil society organizations delivered a statement also at the Human Rights Council calling for recognition. The statement was eventually signed by over 13 civil society organizations, indigenous peoples, social movements, and local communities. Franciscans International is a part of the statement and coalition that came from it, and my colleagues in Geneva, along with other organizations, experts, activists, and others, began increasing efforts to advocate towards recognition. FI was an active member of this coalition. And in October 2021, the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva recognized the right. So after it was recognized in Geneva, the process moved to New York, and we're very fortunate to have offices in both locations. And so we continued advocacy efforts there. And in July 2022, the UN General Assembly also recognized the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Oops, sorry about that. So this next slide shows a graphic of the over 150 countries that recognize the right to a healthy environment in some form, either through constitutional or national laws or regional treaties. I'm not sure if it's very clear on your screen, but the light green indicates a regional treaty. Medium green is via constitutions or national laws, and the dark green is both. As you can see, the US has, perhaps unsurprisingly, not recognized the right to a healthy environment. Next, there are 6 substantive elements of the right to healthy environment and 3 procedural elements. So the 6 substantive elements are clean air, safe climate, safe and sufficient water, healthy and sustainable food, non-toxic environments, and healthy biodiversity and ecosystems. And there are 3 procedural elements, which is access to information, public participation, and access to justice. All of these individual elements are also human rights in and of themselves. And to effectively guarantee the right to a healthy environment, states have the obligation to protect, respect, and fulfill each of these elements separately and in combination. These elements are complementary with each other and with other human rights in line with the principles of universality, interdependence, indivisibility of all human rights. So just very quickly, the UN has experts in both thematic areas and geographical areas, and there is a UN expert or special rapporteur on the environment and human rights. And the special rapporteur and their mandate generally has produced a number of reports on each of these elements and on other topics that are related to the right to a healthy environment. So just to quickly kind of expound on them a little bit. First is clean air. The mandate has underscored that states have the obligation to implement and enforce policies and laws guaranteeing clean air, and has noted numerous causes of air pollution, some of which I've listed: transportation, electricity generation. I'm sure we all familiar with these. The second substantive element is a safe climate. And in this, the special rapporteur has noted the effects of climate change, including sea level rise and extreme weather events, and how they already impact basic life necessities such as housing, food production, livelihoods, and water availability, and how these things will continue to be impacted without adequate measures taken to contend with the climate crisis. Third element is access to safe and sufficient water and healthy freshwater ecosystems. So with this element, states are obliged to implement good management, administration, and protection of water resources. They must also regulate businesses that may contaminate, damage, or appropriate water resources. The last three substantive elements include healthy and sustainable food systems, which refers to the need for food to be produced in ways that avoid harming both the environment and human health. The mandate has also underscored how this is related to a lack of formal land and tenure rights, which particularly impacts vulnerable communities by restricting their access to land and their ability to grow their own food. The fourth or fifth substantive element is non-toxic environments. And I think that this element is really crucial and really considers the disproportionate environmental impacts and human rights violations that poor and historically marginalized communities have been subjected to. And in some places, the conditions are so severe that they are now considered quote unquote sacrifice zones. So the special rapporteur, if you're interested in this topic, did a report specifically on sacrifice zones with the expert on toxics, which I think is quite interesting for us to look at. And last is the substantive element on healthy biodiversity and ecosystems, which is vital for all living beings. And there are some statistics that have been relayed, including that 75% of land surface area is already altered, and about 85% of wetlands have already been destroyed. So pretty grim statistics. Next are the procedural elements of the right to a healthy environment. This includes access to information of public interest, including that related to the environment. So this could include data on emissions and other substances released into the environment, and information regarding climate change and the direct link to the extraction and burning of fossil fuels, for example. Access to information could also take the form of alerting communities about risks such as increased air pollution so that they can take measures to reduce harmful exposure. Public participation is the second procedural element, and this is in decisions that are related to the environment. This could include processes of evaluating and establishing policies and norms. And last but not least is the right to access to justice when any of the procedural rights or substantive elements have not been met in the right to a healthy environment. So there have been also some really interesting developments since recognition. And first and foremost, I would say, is the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion, which came out towards the end of July this year. It underscored that climate change was an existential problem and that all states have a duty to ensure the protection of the climate system from harmful greenhouse gas emissions. The opinion makes it clear that these obligations apply not only to states that are a party to relevant treaties, such as the 2015 Paris Agreement, but extends to all states under customary international law. Importantly, the court also underscored that the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment was a human right and essential for all other human rights. This was preceded by another advisory opinion by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights a few weeks earlier in July, which also recognized that climate change was a human rights emergency. And they said that states have obligations to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Both opinions called on states to effectively regulate private actors in their duty to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights, and to counter the climate crisis. So with that, and sorry, just also another interesting note, which leads us into the next slide, the Inter-American Court particularly mentioned businesses in relation to fossil fuels, agriculture, and deforestation. So perhaps one of the more interesting, I think, for our purposes, a paragraph from the ICJ advisory opinion says that there's a failure of states to take appropriate action to protect the climate system from greenhouse gas emissions, including through fossil fuel production, fossil fuel consumption, the granting of fossil fuel exploration licenses, or the provision of fossil fuel subsidies. So it goes on to say that in doing so, states could be engaging in an internationally wrongful act. I think that this paragraph is very interesting considering the state of the world and of the US. And in September 2025, so just 2 months ago, and following this advisory opinion, the organization Oil Change International found that the US subsidizes the production of oil, gas, and coal by over 30 billion annually. And these subsidies come even as companies like Exxon and Chevron continue to make record profits. And in 2022 and 2023 alone, this was 130 billion. So this issue of fossil fuel subsidies in light of especially the ICJ opinion is really important. And this brings me to the positions of the United States. I am sure that you are aware that the US has generally some quite problematic positions on the environment and climate change, no matter who is in office, which party is in office. So for example, the Biden administration in July 2022, immediately following the recognition of the right to a healthy environment, which they actually voted for at the General Assembly, they issued an explanation of the vote. And they said that a right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment has not been established as a matter of customary law. Treaty law does not provide for it, and there's no legal relationship between such a right and existing international law. So immediately after, they basically said, you know, we voted for this, but don't hold us to it. This position was reiterated in April 2023, so nearly a year later, at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, again saying that it does not exist as a matter of international law. And ahead of the International Court of Justice's deliberations, the US sent their submission, and they basically had similar positions of the right to healthy environment not being binding. So here also right below, these positions haven't changed and have also gotten worse. We have a picture of President Trump at the UN General Assembly this past September. And in his speech there, he said that climate change was a con job and a scam. You can read the full quote there, where he said, "It's the greatest con job ever perpetuated on the world, in my opinion." So there you have it. One topic that we also work on in relation to the environment and climate change, and that's really interlinked with these various processes at the UN and also domestically is the issue of corporate capture. So we continue to see corporations and their lobbyists at UN spaces using their power along with states to derail or weaken processes meant to protect the environment and human rights. This has become a regular sight at the annual Conference of State Parties of the UNFCCC, each year recording a record number. And just a few months ago, negotiations towards a plastic treaty failed as oil-producing states like Saudi Arabia blocked agreement on the text. So here we have some comics that were produced by ESCRnet, which we are a member of as FI. And they've done a lot of great work on corporate capture. So I suggest if you're interested in the topic, you can go to their website and they have focus areas of corporate capture and the UN corporate capture and the healthcare system, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just a slide that reflects some of the things that I had just mentioned. So on the left, one article said that there was a total infiltration of the plastics industry in the negotiations at for the plastics treaty, attempting to derail a deal. On the top right, we have that more than 1,700 fossil fuel lobbyists flooded the UN climate talks in Baku, Azerbaijan. So that was last year's COP. And then right below it, a title or a headline that I just saw in the last few days was that Exxon funded think tanks to spread climate denial in Latin America, documents revealed. So this was an investigation by The Guardian. So we see here that these companies and lobbyists are, targeting all spaces where there might be some sort of attempt to regulate and hold them accountable, whether that's at the UN or as what Exxon did apparently by trying to spread climate denial in different countries. Here also, I thought that this was quite interesting. I saw that there was a headline by the World Health Organization that put out a warning in regards to negotiations on the Framework Convention on Tobacco. This was, this article is from October 2025, so just a week or two ago, and it urged parties to stay vigilant. On the right-hand side, and so something that I personally haven't really considered too much, is that the WHO also a few years ago produced a report on tobacco and the environment. And part of the report said that the environmental consequences of tobacco use move it from being a human problem to a planetary problem. It is not just about the lives of tobacco users and those around them, or even those involved in tobacco production. Tobacco can no longer be categorized as simply a health threat. It is a threat to human development as a whole. So again, we see all of these spaces that are connected on the environment and climate that are being targeted by various corporations, sectors, etc. And now just very quickly, continuing on the theme of corporate capture and highlighting maybe one small example domestically of these relationships between governments and businesses, and something that I just came across, and maybe, in your justice circles, it might be something interesting for you all to discuss or maybe do some research on. I don't know if you're all familiar with the companies on the left, why they're all lumped together. But apparently these are the companies that donated to the ballroom, the new White House ballroom, in addition to some family foundations that I didn't include. So this was from a Politico article, I believe. And some of them aren't really too much of a surprise. So we have Meta and a lot of other tech companies, and we saw their CEOs at the inauguration, so not too surprising that they're donating. But I think is interesting about this group of companies is the more recent headlines that are linked to them. So in regards to Microsoft, for example, we have Bill Gates, its founder, who just in the past week, I believe, came out reversing course on his opinion in terms of climate change. And here in the headline, it says it would not lead to humanity's demise. We also have a headline on Google, which had previously pledged to have net zero by 2030. And they also removed this pledge from their website. So from the article that's headline I pasted on, says, for some in the tech sector, the power demand growth linked to AI expansion has become incompatible with their existing environmental commitments. And this inconvenient truth has coincided with the re-election of Donald Trump, whose administration has signaled it will roll back climate policies and whose allies have disparaged corporate sustainability efforts as part of a quote unquote woke agenda. And I'm sure, as you have seen, Trump has focused on securing critical minerals during various negotiations, which are also crucial to tech companies. So we continue to see this relationship develop with, one, you scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of a thing. The list of companies also includes Altria Group and Reynolds America, which I wasn't too familiar with before, but they are in the tobacco industry. I'm not sure what their role is or their lobbyist role in the Framework Convention, but I thought that was interesting. And also Caterpillar is listed. They are infamous for their use by the Israeli military and the destruction of Palestinian property, land, and resources, including the uprooting of olive trees. I included a small picture there. And because of their usage in the genocide in Gaza, Caterpillar bulldozers were among the only weapons that the US government under Biden stopped the sale of, and this was reversed as soon as Trump came to power. So again, we have a lot of companies that are really infamous for their violations of international law. So I'm going to end it right there so we have some time for Q&A. I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Maria and Brother Jim. I'm going to invite you both to kind of just unmute at this time, and I want to also encourage our webinar participants to enter questions into the Q&A, and we have some for you. But let me first just say thank you as Franciscan Action Network, as we seek to equip ourselves for this important work to accompany you in your important work for the environment. This is just so helpful, right? To talk about the deep change necessary and to look at the real, take a real hard look at the reality of what we're up against. So let me start off with our gratitude for spending these moments with us. I'd like to start us off with kind of a very top level question, and then we'll go from there to see how much time we have. But I was wondering if both of you could respond. I've heard we are going to have over 300 Franciscans at COP30. What is the important work of Franciscans International right now? What do you hope to contribute to COP30? Brother Jim, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think one of the main things is the witness of Franciscans and Franciscan-hearted people in this process. Something which unfortunately has taken place in a number of the recent COPs is that there is a more of an opportunity to have interaction with and voices of those who are of the corporations that Maria mentioned earlier, particularly the petroleum companies having some significant delegations in the past. And I would say it's very important for us, if we're going to look in terms of ecological conversion, if we're going to look in terms of actually defending the right to a healthy environment, then we need other voices there beyond the how can I make money off of this type of a thing, and to ensure that there's that sort of an environment, for lack of another word for the moment, of discussing how the situation with climate change and other environmental problems really are affecting people's lives.
I'll just add quickly, one of the big focus areas that we've been working on and has been really prevalent throughout the UN system and will be discussed at the COP is this issue of quote unquote just transition. And so FI, as a human rights organization, is going to try to make sure that international human rights law is discussed in parallel with the so-called just transition, and that the mistakes of the past are not redone with a new set of minerals, and we see already that a lot of these fossil fuel companies are trying to reposition themselves as the new savior in these like clean energy, whatever, and there's been no accountability. So how do we make sure that there is a fair, transparent process that really respects international human rights law, and also that it doesn't just become what a lot of people say, a new form of green colonialism. And FI is also continuing its work on non-economic loss and damage, which I believe there's a report up on our website that I can maybe drop into the chat or share with you later as well. Thanks.
Thank you. The issue of just transition, it's just massive. Yeah, we could do a whole webinar just on that. Thank you. We have a question here. If you would, brother, speak to, can you speak to the importance of employing the disciplined nonviolence of Gandhi, Dr. King, Francis, in solidarity with climate and environmental justice? Just a word on that, please.
Sure. It's very easy to get frustrated with the realities of the problems that we face. And part of the whole term disciplined nonviolence is that there's a set of sort of reflection. It's not simply a reaction to what we face, but rather there's some reflection, there's some contemplation on it, and to be intentional then in the way in which we can make the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth known, to use Pope Francis's expressions there. And so I think these sorts of techniques become very important so that we can in fact stay on the track and to be able to make that voice heard in the best way possible.
And indeed, in the end, it's the only effective tool, perhaps. Thank you so much for that. Welcome to expand upon that, Maria, if you want to. But I want to go to two related questions, kind of coming from a fraternity of Franciscans, just asking, what can we do to engage regarding the integrity of creation? Like, so what practical things can we do? And specifically, someone asks, you mentioned that planting trees in other countries is colonialism. Some environmental organizations encourage this. So should we not contribute to planting trees? What is recommended instead? So general comments there from both of you, please.
I'll just start off to clarify. I didn't say that planting trees was colonialism. I was talking about this issue of just transition, and that now there are minerals that are going to be used in quote unquote green technologies like solar panels, etc. So the critique that we hear a lot of the time is, again, these companies, the certain states are going into countries continuing with the same extractivist models of the past, but with different minerals, taking the wealth of these countries and using them for their own purposes towards this supposed transition. So that is what I meant by green colonialism. It's that, these super wealthy corporations, other states, et cetera, are going in often without the consent of local populations and continuing these extractivist models. So just to be clear on that.
I did use the term carbon colonialism because it was in the report from the UN University Institute for Environment and Human Security. And I guess it'd be good to clarify on this too. Certainly is neither my position nor the position in that report that we shouldn't plant trees. But the problem that's being highlighted there is doing that so as to sort of in place of other forms of ecological conversion. So, okay, we do more mining in this place, but okay, we'll offset that by just planting some more trees over there without taking into account the sort of conversion that needs to take place on the very action you're doing first. Very similar to what Mario was just saying now. And easily just sort of, it becomes too easy for some to say, okay, well, at least we planted another 100,000 trees over in that place, far, far away, and I can, do a sort of greenwashing around that. So certainly planting trees is good, but it doesn't do the other part of the conversion, which is also necessary.
Thank you both. I think if we could, we'd sit at your feet for another half hour just asking questions, but we are at this point just going to extend our gratitude very sincerely, not only for being with us tonight, but also for your incredible service within the Franciscan family, and for continuing to invite us into that. Thank you so much. Truly. At this time, and before we go into closing prayer, I would like to invite Sister Louise and Maya von Rossmann to come on to talk about what's going to happen in December.
Thank you, Nora. So the question is, what can we do in the United States to ensure that all people have the right to a clean and healthy environment? We saw that map where the United States was not one of the nations of the world that has said that there is a right to a clean and healthy environment. But to answer that question of what we can we do in the United States, I'd like to introduce Maya K. von Rossum, who is the co-founder of the Green Amendments for the Generations movement. And I think if we can get a little taste of what we're going to talk about in December 2nd, Maya, we would be delighted. You're on.
And I'm afraid I'm guilty of being the founder. So if you love the movement, I'll take credit for it. And if you find fault with the movement, well, you can come blame me. But, we really powerful presentations tonight, hearing about what's happening overseas. Here in the United States of America, we hear from politicians all the time. We hear from regulators even trying to reference existing US law, saying that the people in the United States of America, people around the world, have an actual right to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And yet, at the same time, we see people across the United States that are breathing polluted air, drinking contaminated water, being forced to live next to toxic sites. We have kids that are being exposed to so many neurotoxicants, they're actually losing their capacity to learn. And so it's really fine and dandy for the politicians and the legislators and the regulators to say that we have a right to a clean and healthy environment. But what does that actually mean if you can't enforce that right? So our Green Amendment movement is about actually taking that inalienable human right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment and using US democracy and US law to actually make that right meaningful, accessible, and truly enforceable. And to do so in the near term, not decades down the line when it's going to be too late to address the climate crisis and too many people will have lost their healthy lives, but actually in a matter of years, if we can buckle down, work together, and really dive in on the Green Amendment movement. So I hope you'll join us in December. You'll learn about what the movement is, how it works, why we need it, and how we can truly accomplish an enforceable right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment here in the United States of America that will be truly applauded by our overseas friends and neighbors.
Thank you, Maya, founder of the Green Amendments for the Generations movement in the United States. And it is an amazing movement. And I think you'll just be delighted when you hear Maya talk about it on December 2nd. As Pope Francis said in Laudato Si, the climate is a common good belonging to all and meant for all. Let us gather all that we've heard and said and welcome Sister Mary Ann Mueller, who is the Justice and Peace Coordinator for the Felician Sisters of North America, to lead us in a closing prayer.
And our closing prayer is based on Pope Leo's message for the 10th World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation. We pray that our God will send us in abundance His Spirit from on high, so that the seeds we sow may bring forth an abundant harvest of peace and hope to our world, both today and in the future. Amen.
Thank you, Sister Marianne, for that beautiful prayer and for all the ways that you support and partner with the Franciscan Network. Thank you so much. Well, we were about to close our evening, but we couldn't do that without two quick announcements, please. And believe it or not, we're going to get you out of here on time. The first is, as promised, we will be soon sending out a follow-up email with the recording of this webinar, with many of the resources that Maria and Brother Jim shared with us. So we invite you to take a look at that, consider sharing among your networks, making use of those within your circles. This follow-up email will also include a number of ways to take action, the Franciscan Action Network, right? We have two requests that, advocating right here at home around the Arctic Refuge Protection Act and the Roadless Area Conservation Act, issues we've been lifting up over the last month as we, in the United States, seek to dismantle some protections around our public lands. So again, we ask you to take direct action on those two issues. And then finally, for our member institutions on this webinar tonight, I want to remind you that we ask that Catholic leaders from our member institutions, please add your signature to the letter to Secretary Rubio on COP30 and the disappointment over our lack of official participation in COP30. And that letter will be hand delivered to the State Department either Monday or Tuesday of next week. So get those signatures in tonight. We are delighted that I think it's over 75 now Catholic organizations have signed on to that. So we're looking forward to delivering that to Secretary Rubio. And finally, just a reminder yet again, join us in December 2nd, for the second webinar in our series of 3 with Maya. And we are going to show you a different map, right? And this is the map of the Green Amendments movement in the United States. We're going to break that open and then look forward to a third webinar in January. Our deep gratitude to our Franciscan family, to our circles, to our prayer leaders, and most of all to our panelists, Maria and Brother Jim. Thank you all, and have a great night.